Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I'm JC Owens, and this is Rockmyworld, episode 36, Robin Hood and the Power of Legend. Now, since the beginning of time, human beings have been telling stories. Stories are, and narrative are how we understand the world to a great degree. It's how human beings have always understood the world. Now, you'll have lots of people who like to say that, oh, well, video games, movies, and these things don't really influence people. These stories don't really influence people when it's in a bad way. And then they'll applaud its influence when it helps in a good way, right? Yeah, we like to be real about it here. Like, it neither fully influences people to do what they do, nor, like, does it not influence them at all. It's somewhere in between. But they are nevertheless incredibly important. And considering that Hollywood is putting out a new Robin Hood movie, I thought it appropriate that we talk about the West's OG outlaw, as if we're he's probably one of the first outlaw archetypes to really be super popular here in the West at all. Going all the way back to, probably the early Middle Ages, way before the 15th century, 16th century version that we're familiar with. The story goes back to, way before that. Um, but as long as we've been telling stories, though, those in power have been seeking to take them over and twist them to their own specific uses, right? This is what, like, they're doing today. It's what they did back then, right? The original Robin Hood was an outlaw, and he, stood up to the powerful, like, for his own ends, for the most part. The robbing from the rich and giving to the poor part didn't really come into the story yet, but it did eventually work its way in. Even before the Robin Hood becoming a noble part, that had become a central tenet. I think this is probably through the influence of Christianity mostly, and this idea of charity to the poor. It's going to influence the story a great deal, but nevertheless, through all these changes, there has been a through line where Robin is the archetype of, the man who stands up, for the underdog, for the little people, right? Like, that's been the through line through most of all the Robin Hood myths. Like, he fights the corrupt bishops at the church and the, corrupt sheriffs, and he, kind of socks them in the eye for the little guy. This has been a very important part of Western culture for a very long time, and I would say that Hollywood is trying very hard to knock the wind out of it. You see it also with the Odyssey recently, how they are subverting these very old stories. Why are they doing that? Well, it's because they are so powerful. Like, these legends that that people tell each other, they are one of the most powerful motivators, especially for the young. These stories are extremely powerful for the young. We've talked about this before, and the ruling elite would really like to be able to twist all these stories, all these legends, all these different works of art for their own purposes. It's always been that way. And, that's one of the reasons I bring up Robin Hood, is because it has been, it as well has been subverted for the ruling elites, like, since way before now. As I said, like, Robin started off, he was just a regular outlaw. It was later that I think it was the 16th century maybe, or maybe it was the 15th century, he started to become a noble that had lost his lands in these stories, because the elites at the time figured, well, this story's way too popular. We can't have just a regular old, like, outlaw from lower birth running around and robbing the rich and giving to the poor. So we're going to have to make him a noble, and who's lost his lands unjustly, and we're going to have to add Maid Marian, because if he's a noble, he's definitely going to have a lady. And all these other kind of conventions start entering into the story. Why? Well, because they wanted to control the narrative. The story had become too popular, and this idea of a lower-born person running around and robbing the rich was not going to get over very well with the ruling aristocracy, obviously. So they pay some writers at the time to kind of doctor the story a little bit. And from what I've seen about this new movie, it seems that they're trying to do a very similar thing today, where it's, trying to sully the character a little bit and make him a little too real. These legends are meant to serve as a moral compass for us. It's why our ancestors told these stories. They told these stories to their youth at the time because they wanted to guide their moral compass. It's a powerful tool for that. And if these things get subverted, if we keep allowing Hollywood to grab hold of stories like Robin Hood or the Odyssey and just do whatever they want with them, well, we're asking for a lot of trouble. It's been known since the time of Plato and before that, like, grabbing hold of the art of a society and warping it for the state's, own ends is a very dangerous thing. Like, it's a dangerous, arrangement to have set up. Hollywood has come to a point where it is very centralized, and you can't say anything in the industry without, adhering to a certain set of rules. There are certain things you cannot say out here in the land of the setting sun. You can get away with acting about as debaucherous as you want behind closed doors. You can, get away with doing a lot of things, but there is a certain list that you just cannot touch, right? And, they're always going to have a certain agenda behind anything that gets created in this town, in this state, period. The whole industry is controlled by the same group of people, and they're not going to let anything get made unless it pushes the agendas that they see fit to push. And, we have to be aware of that. I've gotten to the point where I don't watch many Hollywood movies anymore because, I can't do so without seeing the agenda, being pushed in my face 24/7. I see it all too well. So, I would caution all of you to limit what goes into your heads, right, to things that, push a message that is, more positive and, towards humanity being free, like we talk about here so much. That's another reason I brought up the Robin Hood legend, is because, right now when, tyranny has, got such a grip on our government and our institutions, it's really important that these kinds of legends, stay true to their rebellious roots, I guess you could say. Their heroic roots. Because, as I've said before, when tyranny becomes the norm, the outlaw becomes the hero. But we'll stop it there for now, folks. We'll talk at you next weekend. As always, much love and peace out.